Montana Territory. 1878, the first time Yates Ashford saw her. She was crouched near the well behind the trading post in Stillwater, turning a smooth rock over in her palm like it held the answer to something only she could hear. "She does not talk," the shopkeeper muttered as Yates tied his horse. "Simple-minded, folks say. Best not stare." Yates did not listen. He never had much use for what people thought. He watched her instead, watched the way her fingers moved slow and careful over the stone, watched the wind lift strands of her dark hair and the way she blinked like each breath took effort. There was something quiet about her, not broken. Just quiet, like the hush before a storm or the stillness of snow before it fell. She looked up and saw him watching. Her eyes didn't flinch. They held his for a long second, then dropped back to the rock. Yates looked away, his throat dry. He had ridden into Stillwater only that morning, his saddle sore from the week-long ride up from Red Lodge. The cattle drive was over, the trail dust still caked behind his ears. He had not meant to stay longer than a day. But now he lingered. He learned her name was Selah Dorsey. 22, same as him. Lived with her uncle out on the edge of town near the creek that ran sharp and cold through the cottonwoods. Her mother died when she was little, her father not long after. Folks said she had been strange ever since, never spoke more than a word or two, never smiled. But Yates watched the way she crouched when the town's stray hound limped past, how she reached into her coat pocket and set a crust of bread beside it without meeting its eyes. He saw the way she studied the ground like it held secrets. Maybe she did not speak much. But Yates had never needed noise to understand someone. He saw her again 2 days later. This time by the river, skirt wet to the knees, her boots tossed up on a flat stone. She was catching minnows with her hands, slow, patient movements, like she had all the time in the world. He stayed back, not wanting to scare her. Then she looked up. Her eyes met his, and this time she did not look away. She just stared, water dripping from her fingers. "Want help?" he asked, voice low. She blinked once, then nodded. He waded in beside her, boots and all, and they fished together in silence. She caught more than he did. That night he laid awake in the bunkhouse behind the saloon, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her eyes, thinking about her silence. The next morning he found her near the mill, watching the wheel turn. He handed her a small wooden carving of a fox he had whittled the night before. She took it without a word, turned it gently in her hands. "You like foxes?" he asked. She nodded. "You got a favorite animal?" She hesitated, then raised her finger and pointed to the sky. A hawk circled overhead. Yates smiled. "Good choice." Each day after that he found her, or maybe she found him. They never spoke much, but she always looked at him like he was something solid. Like she trusted him to stay. He never pushed her to talk. But he waited, not for answers, just for her. She started to write things down, not full sentences, just words. One day she pressed a folded paper into his palm. It read, "You are kind." He carried that paper in his coat pocket for the next week. Then came the fire. A boy had knocked over a lantern in the back of the general store. Flames spread fast. Selah's uncle had gone inside after hearing shouting, not realizing Selah was still in the back, gathering herbs for a tea she brewed for the sick widow down the road. Yates was in the livery when the smoke reached the sky. When he heard her name, he ran. No saddle, no thought, just boots over dirt and ash. He shoved past the grocer, past her uncle who was coughing hard and wheezing in the alley. "She is still in there," the man gasped. Yates did not pause. He kicked the side door open, heat rushing at him like a slap. He called her name. Once. Twice. His throat burned. Then he saw her crouched low, shawl pulled over her head, eyes wide with smoke. He reached her in 3 strides, wrapped her in his arms, and carried her out through the flames. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just held tight to his shirt, face buried in his neck as he ran. They did not leave each other's side after that. A week passed. Her uncle's burns healed. The townsfolk stopped whispering when they saw Yates and Selah walking side by side near the creek, his hand never far from hers. Then, one evening at dusk, as the last light bled gold over the hills, Selah touched his arm and said, clear and soft, "Thank you for waiting." It was the first full sentence he had ever heard from her. He turned, heart thudding like a hammer. "You never needed to speak for me to hear you," he said. She smiled, then small but real. And he knew right then he would never leave her, not for anything, not ever. Late summer settled heavy over Stillwater, the heat stretching long into evening, making the earth smell of dust and pine sap. Selah had begun meeting Yates each morning just after sunrise, where the cottonwoods leaned toward the creek and the light came soft through the branches. She wore a faded blue dress with sleeves rolled above her elbows and a strip of leather tied around her wrist. He never asked why. He figured if she wanted him to know, she'd show him in time. One morning, as he passed her a handful of wild strawberries he'd found near the edge of a bluff, she traced a finger over a pink bruise on his forearm. "Horse spooked," he said, sitting beside her on the grass. "Snapped the reins right out my hand. Fool thing thought a jackrabbit was a cougar." She brushed her fingertips gently over the mark, then let her hand rest on her lap. For a while, neither of them moved. Across the creek, a hawk called once and wheeled away over the ridge. "Do you miss anything?" she asked. He turned his head. She rarely spoke first, like what, before this? Before now. He thought for a moment, picking a blade of grass and twisting it between his fingers. "Maybe my ma's biscuits," he said. "Maybe sleeping without always hearing cattle groaning in their sleep." She looked at him. Waiting, he sighed. "I guess. I miss not carrying so many things in my mind. You ride too long with ghosts and they start turning into passengers." Selah didn't answer. She pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, her gaze fixed on the water. Then, almost too quiet to catch, she said, "I used to sing." Yates didn't say anything. He waited. "I stopped after my father's hands went still," she whispered. No one wanted music after that. The wind shifted. A dry leaf tumbled across the grass. "I'd like to hear you sing," he said. She gave a small shake of her head. "Not yet." "All right." They watched the water roll over rocks until the light changed and the birds quieted. That afternoon, he fetched a rusted tin kettle from the bunkhouse and started patching the seams. Selah sat nearby on an overturned crate, watching him work, hands folded around a piece of pale linen. She'd been embroidering small yellow flowers stitched with such care it made his chest ache. "You've got a way with thread," he said. "My mother taught me," she said. She said the needle kept her from cracking clean apart. He nodded, eyes still on his task. "You think she'd have liked me?" Selah tilted her head, considering. "She'd have made you stand straight and wash your hands before supper." "But yes," he chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Guess I'd have done it if she asked." By evening, he walked her back to her uncle's house. The porch sagged in the middle, but the wood was swept clean. A row of drying herbs hung under the eaves. As they reached the step, she paused, turned to face him. "Would it be all right if I came with you tomorrow?" "Where to?" "Wherever you go." He looked at her, the way her chin lifted just a little, like she was testing the shape of her own courage. "Then we'll go to the ridge," he said. "There's a clearing up there. You can see every inch of Stillwater, even the lake beyond the glen." She nodded once, quiet and sure. The next morning they rode double on his bay gelding, her arms lightly around his waist, her cheek just brushing his back. He'd never known silence could feel so full. At the clearing, she dismounted first, boots pressing into soft moss. She stood at the edge of the ridge, the wind tugging her skirt, and Yates watched her face as she looked out over the land so still. He wondered if she was remembering something or letting it go. After a long while, she turned to him. "I used to dream I'd leave here," she said. "Run far enough that no one would remember how I was after, but you stayed. I didn't know there could be something worth staying for." He crossed to her, slow. "There is now," she nodded. Her hand found his and held it, fingers cool and sure. They stood like that a long time, the sun slipping behind the ridge, their shadows stretching out behind them like old stories finally easing to rest. The first hard frost came early that year, silvering the fields outside Stillwater before the cottonwoods had given up their last leaves. Yates carried an extra wool blanket rolled behind his saddle and checked his horses' hooves twice a day, wary of ice. The season was shifting, and with it came things that couldn't be undone: bone-deep cold, brittle mornings, and quiet reckonings. Selah had begun stitching a quilt by lantern light, her needle clicking steady into the evenings. She didn't tell him what the pattern meant, but he noticed how the center squares were all deep red, surrounded by pale blue and then green. He watched her hands moving, thread pulled taut and sure, and understood enough not to ask. One morning, as the smoke from her uncle's chimney curled low and sluggish in the sky, she met Yates at the edge of the woods with a piece of paper folded in half. She handed it to him without a word. He opened it and read, "Do you ever feel like you were meant for more than surviving?" He folded the paper back down, tucked it into his coat. "I used to," he said, "back when I thought more had to mean bigger, farther. Now I think more might just be peace that stays." She nodded slowly, not looking at him. They walked a while through the underbrush, frost crunching underfoot, the trees bare and rattling above them. Selah reached down and picked up a small, broken antler, half buried in the leaves. She turned it in her hand, then passed it to him. "For what?" she shrugged. "Carve something." He smiled, slipping it into his satchel. "All right." That afternoon he shaped it into a sparrow, small and rough-edged. He didn't say anything when he gave it to her, just pressed it into her hand as they stood by the woodpile behind the smithy, the air thick with coal smoke. She traced the wings with her thumb, then slid it into the pocket of her apron without a word. The next week, her uncle fell from the porch step in the early dawn and cracked 2 ribs. He waved off the doctor and refused to lie still, but Selah took over the chores without complaint. Yates helped when he could, splitting wood, hauling water, checking the roofline for loose shingles. She never asked, and he never made a show of it. One evening he found her in the shed, patching a broken latch. Her hands were red with cold, her braid tucked beneath a wool cap too big for her head. "You'll ruin your fingers if you keep at it without gloves," he said. "I don't mind." He took the hammer from her gently. "I do." She didn't argue. She watched as he set the new nail, his breath clouding the air between them. "You ever think about staying?" she asked after a while. He looked over his shoulder. "Here, with me." He turned fully toward her, the hammer loose in his grip. "I think about it every day." Her eyes didn't waver. "You don't miss the trail, not the way I miss you when I'm not near." She stepped forward until her coat brushed his. "You waited, even when I didn't speak. Even when I wasn't sure if I could." "I'll keep waiting," he said, voice low. "Even if you never say another word." She reached up and touched the side of his face, her hand warm despite the cold. "I want to build something with you," she said. "Not just get by." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "Then let's build it." There were no more words after that, just the sound of the wind lifting through the pines and the soft creak of the shed door behind them. 2 weeks later they stood before the preacher in the back room of the general store, her uncle seated stiffly on a crate beside the stove, a wool blanket draped across his lap. The vows were short, the rings simple bands hammered from old coins. When the preacher said it was done, Yates took Selah's hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. She looked at him, eyes steady. "Home," she said. He nodded. "Wherever you are." They stepped out into the cold together, and the wind didn't feel as sharp. By late November, the wind had turned sharp enough to carry grit through the seams of the cabin walls. Yates spent most mornings cutting wood before first light, his breath feathering out into the dark, while Selah boiled water over the stove and sorted dried roots into small linen pouches she stitched herself. The silence between them had shifted, no longer cautious, but full of small understandings passed without need for words. The cabin they now shared had once belonged to an old trapper who died 2 winters back. It leaned slightly to the west and creaked when the snow packed heavy on its roof, but the hearth held heat well, and the back room had enough space for her loom and the cedar chest Yates had dragged up from the smithy's barn. One evening, while snow gathered in soft piles along the windowsill, Selah set a small bundle in his lap, a dark blue shirt stitched by hand, the seams careful and even. "I thought your old one might not see through another winter," she said. Yates held it up, thumb brushing the collar. "You made this," she nodded, easing down beside him on the bench. Her hair was still damp from the melted snow he'd carried in earlier, and her sleeves were rolled past her elbows again, revealing a small round scar just above her wrist, pale against her skin. He hadn't seen it before. "What happened there?" She glanced down. "I burned it when I was 12. My uncle left the kettle on while he walked out to feed the hens. I tried to move it myself." He set the shirt aside. "You always carry things alone." "I used to think I had to." Yates leaned his shoulder lightly against hers. "You don't anymore." She didn't speak, but her head tipped toward him, just enough to rest in the space above his collarbone. That winter, the snow came hard and fast, blanketing the valley in thick drifts. One morning they found a mare collapsed near the edge of the tree line, her flank heaving, eyes wild with fever. Yates built a lean-to and stayed with her through the night, rubbing her legs with burlap and melted lard to draw the cold out. Selah brought hot mash and sat beside him, her hands steady as she pressed herbs against the horse's gums. "She won't make it if her legs freeze through," he said. Selah didn't answer. She just held the mare's head and whispered something low, almost like a prayer. By sunrise, the mare was standing. Later, as they walked back to the cabin with snow clinging to their boots, Yates glanced over. "You always know what to say to the things that can't speak." Selah looked up at him, her cheeks pink from the cold. "That's why I understand you," he laughed, a sound thick and real in the morning quiet. "Fair enough." In December they received a letter. It came folded in oilskin, delivered by a trapper on his way from Helena. It was from Yates' older brother, whom he hadn't seen in over 6 years. The handwriting was rough, the words pressed hard into the paper. Yates read it twice, jaw tight. Selah waited. "He's got a bad leg now," Yates said finally. "Took a bullet in the knee working as a deputy near Deer Lodge. Wants to know if I'll come help him through the winter." She didn't flinch, just watched him with her steady way. "I thought about going," he added. "I really did." She brushed a hand across his sleeve, fingers curling near his elbow. "And," he looked down at her hand, then back toward the fire, "and I'm not leaving this." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Inside, the logs cracked and shifted in the hearth. Selah reached behind her and pulled out a book bound in worn leather, the spine nearly gone. She opened it to a page near the back and held it out to him. He took it, reading the words at the top. "What is this?" "A record," she said. "Of what we're building." Below the line she'd written his name and hers and the date they were married. Underneath, she'd started a list things they'd done, things they'd made: the quilt, the carved sparrow, the blue shirt, the lean-to, the saved mare. "You keep track of all this?" he asked. I don't want to forget. He set the book down and turned to her. Then let's give you more to remember. Her eyes didn't waver. Yes. That night, as the wind rose and the fire burned low, they lay curled together beneath the quilt she'd stitched, their hands clasped between them. No need for promises. They'd already made them with every day lived, every silence shared, every small act of care that stitched their lives into something that could not be undone. By late February, the snow had begun to recede in thin patches along the cabin's south wall, revealing damp earth and the first stubborn shoots of wild onion. The days were still cold, but sunlight lingered longer in the evenings, and Yates had taken to repairing their fence line, one post at a time, while Selah cleared wintered-over roots in the kitchen garden. Quiet work, steady and shared. One morning, Selah stood in the doorway, her hands tucked into the pockets of her wool coat, watching Yates mend the corner gate. He didn't look up, but his voice carried soft across the yard. "You ever think you'd have this?" "I didn't know what this was," she answered. Now he turned. "What is it to you?" She stepped down the porch steps slowly, boots crunching over frost-hardened grass. "Something that stays, something that doesn't ask me to be different." He set the hammer down, brushing sawdust from his sleeve. "It's yours, Selah." "All of it." She crossed to him and stood still, eyes on the horizon. "I want to plant plum trees," she said. "Two. One for each side of the path." He didn't hesitate. "We'll ride to the nursery in Billings come spring thaw, pick 'em out together. And maybe a cow," she added. "For milk," he laughed, surprised. "You planning on turning this into a farm now?" She looked at him sideways. "I don't mind hard work, I just want to make something that feeds us." He nodded, reaching for her hand. "We'll do all of it, just not the chickens." "I've got no love for birds." She smiled, but didn't press. That had always been her way. She never reached for more than he was ready to give. That afternoon, they sat on the porch with their boots off, letting the sun warm their stockings. Selah held a small tin box in her lap, the lid rusted in one corner. "I saved this from my mother's things," she said, opening it. Inside lay a small pair of scissors, a button carved from bone, a faded ribbon, and a scrap of cotton with a stitched edge. "She used this cloth to wipe my face when I cried," she said. "Even after she got sick." Yates looked at the cotton, its edges worn smooth. "You still dream about her, sometimes," she said, eyes distant. "She's always sewing. I never see her face. Just her hands and her lap." Yates traced the edge of the ribbon. "You think she'd be proud of you?" Selah folded the tin shut. "I think she'd be glad I'm not alone." The next morning they rode out along the ridge trail, where the snow had melted in long ribbons between the pines. Selah had packed bread and dried venison in a cloth satchel, while Yates carried a small hand axe and a length of rope. They stopped near the high bluff, where the view stretched north to the distant hills. "We could build a second cabin here someday," Yates said, squinting into the sun. "For when we've got more people needing space." Selah tipped her head. "You mean children?" He looked at her, the wind tugging at his collar. "Only if you want." She ran a hand across the front of her skirt, then bent to pick up a smooth stone. "I do." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Then we'll make room for them, one day at a time." She looked up, her eyes as clear as the sky above them. "I'd name a girl after my mother," he nodded. "And I'd teach a boy how to track deer and mend boots proper." They stayed up there until the light began to slant gold across the valley. On the ride back, Selah leaned into his back, her palm resting just above his belt. Steady and warm, by April, the plum trees had arrived, 2 saplings bound in burlap and tied with twine. Yates dug the holes while Selah mixed compost from the winter heap. They planted the trees with care, tamping down the earth and tying each trunk to a cedar stake. Each morning after, Selah watered them at first light, whispering something into the leaves before moving down the path toward the garden. The quilt on their bed grew larger, square by square, until it covered the mattress fully. A second one took shape beside it, the pattern more intricate, the colors brighter. Yates carved a cradle from pine planks, sanding it down until it shone like honey. He didn't ask when it would be needed. He just made it strong. One evening, as the last of the snow melted into the creek and the frogs began their low, throaty song, Selah stood in the doorway of the cabin, her hands resting on her belly. He stepped behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. "Are you afraid?" she asked. He pressed his cheek to her hair. "No, not with you. I want them to know peace," she said. "Not just survival, not just quiet, but the kind that comes from choosing to stay." He turned her gently to face him. "They will." "Because we did." He touched her cheek and she leaned into it, her eyes never leaving his. "I love you, Yates," she said. He didn't speak. He just kissed her, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything more than what they already were. And there, with the door open and the wind soft through the grass, the world felt full of everything they'd worked to build. Years passed. The cradle held 2 children in time, a girl with dark hair and steady hands, and a boy who laughed in his sleep. The plum trees grew strong, their blossoms pale and fragrant each spring. The garden fed them through summer and into fall, and the second quilt warmed the bed in the loft where their daughter slept. They taught their children to listen to the rhythm of the land, to speak only when ready, and to never mistake silence for absence. On cold nights, Selah sang again, her voice low and clear, threading through the walls like a remembered lullaby. And every evening, as the fire burned low and the children curled close, Yates reached for Selah's hand and held it just the same as he had when the world first began to turn in their favor. They did not chase more. They simply lived and stayed together. Always.